Welcome, viewers. You're back with Bring the Fact, where every headline hides a deeper story waiting to be revealed. This time, we'll uncover the hidden side of a monumental event that's shaking the Middle East: the unexpected ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and the exchange of prisoners and hostages that followed. Was this agreement truly a step toward peace, or just another political strategy masked as diplomacy? What does this deal reveal about the power balance behind the negotiations? And why are both sides celebrating the same event for very different reasons? But before we dive in, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. That way, you won't miss any hidden facts that we'll reveal next. The world has watched for months as a fragile thread of negotiation tried to pull two sworn enemies back from the edge of devastation. Then, late last night, a statement from Hamas shifted the atmosphere across the region. They confirmed that a list of Palestinian prisoners had been officially handed over to mediators, a list intended for exchange with Israeli hostages. Within hours, both Hamas and Israel announced something few dared to imagine anymore: a ceasefire agreement. For the first time in nearly 2 years, the skies over Gaza and southern Israel were silent. Reports from multiple diplomatic channels revealed that this deal was not born overnight. Behind closed doors, mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and the United States spent weeks drafting an agreement that could satisfy both sides. The final version included a detailed timetable for the release of living hostages held by Hamas, as well as the gradual freedom of Palestinian detainees imprisoned by Israel. It was an exchange of pain for peace, the kind of bargain that only decades of bloodshed could force into existence. According to official records, the first phase involved Hamas releasing 20 Israeli hostages who had been held since the early days of the war. In return, Israel agreed to release 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, including more than 200 who had been serving life sentences. Convoys of buses left Israeli prisons at dawn, carrying men and women who had not seen daylight beyond bars in years. The footage was emotional: tears, raised hands, and whispers of "finally." In Gaza, spontaneous celebrations erupted as news spread. Families poured into the streets, waving Palestinian flags and chanting freedom. In Tel Aviv, parents who had waited months for news of their children clung to each other, watching the first hostages walk free on television. For once, grief took a backseat to relief. But beneath the jubilation, a quiet tension lingered, an unspoken awareness that this peace might not last long. At the border crossing of Rafah, the symbol of division turned into a corridor of hope. Aid trucks lined up under the watchful eyes of international monitors, waiting for clearance to deliver medicine and food to areas that had been unreachable for months. Journalists described the scene as a surreal calm, where the sound of engines replaced the echoes of explosions. Children peeked from behind rubble, smiling shyly at the passing trucks. Hope, though fragile, was alive again. Meanwhile, inside Israel's security headquarters, the atmosphere was far from celebratory. Officials combed through the list submitted by Hamas, cross-checking every name, every identification number, ensuring no deception was at play. For them, the ceasefire was a test of trust, and trust had long been a casualty of this war. Still, the Israeli government approved the first release phase, citing humanitarian grounds and the potential opening for extended peace. Analysts pointed out that this agreement carried symbolic weight far beyond the exchange itself. It was a moment where both sides, exhausted, wounded, and politically pressured, realized that endless war was unsustainable. The release of hostages became not just a humanitarian gesture, but a diplomatic signal to the world that the door to negotiation was finally open again. International media outlets called it the most significant ceasefire since the 2023 conflict. As night fell over Gaza City, fireworks lit up the skyline, a rare sight in a place more familiar with airstrikes than celebration. In a small courtyard, a boy lifted his sister onto his shoulders to see the colors burst in the sky. In Tel Aviv, candles burned on balconies as families prayed for loved ones still missing. Across borders and walls, people who had never met were united by the same fragile wish, that this time, peace might hold. But the world knows the Middle East too well. Beneath every peace announcement lies a labyrinth of conditions, mistrust, and unfinished promises. The question now isn't whether the ceasefire was signed, it's whether it can survive the weight of history pressing against it.
The first night of the ceasefire was eerily quiet. No air raid sirens, no distant rumble of artillery, just the faint hum of generators and the sound of the sea rolling against Gaza's battered shore. But silence, in a place that had known nothing but war, was not comfort, it was suspense. The next morning, a convoy of black vehicles crossed into Israel, carrying the first remains of several hostages. Hamas had claimed they were among those who perished during the bombardments. Yet as Israeli forensic teams opened the coffins, doubts began to spread. One of the bodies, it turned out, did not belong to any of the listed hostages. At the same time, 8 other coffins were confirmed to contain the bodies of Israeli captives, now returned after months in secret tunnels. The Israeli government issued a cautious statement, demanding that Hamas fulfill its full obligation and return every remaining hostage, dead or alive. Meanwhile, Hamas spokesman announced that they had already handed over all bodies that could be retrieved. Between those two claims lay a dangerous gap, a silence filled with suspicion. International mediators stationed in Doha and Cairo scrambled to maintain calm. Reports indicated that several bodies remained trapped under collapsed buildings in northern Gaza, areas where access was still nearly impossible due to unexploded ordnance. Yet inside Israel, patience was fading. Critics accused the government of trusting a deal made with an organization that hides truth behind ruins. In response, Israel temporarily slowed humanitarian aid shipments into Gaza, warning that full compliance from Hamas was a precondition for continued assistance. The United Nations expressed concern, calling on both sides to avoid actions that could undermine the fragile truce. On the ground, aid trucks waited for clearance under the scorching sun. Children and women lined the roads, holding empty jugs, their eyes following the convoy that never moved. Inside Gaza, the narrative was different. Hamas representatives claimed Israel was deliberately politicizing the recovery of bodies, while families of Palestinian prisoners released in the exchange gathered in public squares, chanting in celebration. "Our sons are home," one mother cried, waving a photo of her child freed after 15 years in prison. But joy was uneven. Across town, others wept for those still missing, both Palestinians and Israelis, trapped in the ruins of a war that had taken too much. As days passed, the ceasefire held, but tension began to crack its surface. Israeli intelligence leaked reports that some Hamas units were refusing to comply with the full disarmament conditions included in the agreement. Hamas, in turn, accused Israel of continuing surveillance flights over Gaza in violation of the truce. The rhetoric hardened on both sides. Diplomats warned that one misstep, one misinterpreted act, could unravel everything. Despite the friction, international observers noted one rare outcome. Communication lines between Hamas and Israel remained open. For the first time in years, officers from both sides were speaking indirectly through Egyptian mediators, exchanging updates not about war targets, but about lists, names, locations, identifications. Behind those exchanges, there was a quiet recognition. Peace, however temporary, had value. Still, the atmosphere was brittle. When the 8th coffin was identified incorrectly, social media in Israel erupted in outrage. Hashtags calling for the resumption of operations trended within hours. In Gaza, residents braced for the worst, fearing that one political spark could ignite another inferno. Amid this growing distrust, one question hovered over both sides of the border. Could truth survive in the fog of so much loss? And yet, even as leaders traded accusations, a flicker of human connection persisted. In one shelter north of Gaza City, a child was seen lighting a candle beside a wall marked with bullet holes, whispering a prayer for his missing father. The image spread across networks, a silent reminder that peace, no matter how uncertain, was still worth holding on to.
When dawn broke over Gaza, the city was unrecognizable. For the first time in years, the morning call to prayer was not drowned by the sound of drones. Along the coast, fishermen who had spent months hiding finally pushed their boats into the sea again. In the streets, children ran barefoot, chasing flags that fluttered in the wind. The word peace was being whispered in languages of relief: Arabic, Hebrew, and even silence. For a moment, it felt as if both sides had stepped out of history's shadow. In Tel Aviv, the mood was just as emotional. Families gathered at the hostage return center, where 20 freed Israelis reunited with loved ones. The air was thick with tears and disbelief. One father held his son's face in his hands, whispering, "You're home. You're really home." Cameras flashed, news crews crowded the gates, and for a few precious minutes, the nation remembered what unity felt like. Even those who had lost faith in negotiation admitted that something about this moment felt different, as if history had paused to take a breath. Across the border, in Gaza City main square, thousands gathered carrying portraits of prisoners recently released from Israeli jails. Loudspeakers echoed songs of freedom, men danced with keffiyehs raised high, women ululating with joy, and children waved small paper flags painted with green and white. Amid the euphoria, some carried banners that read, "This is not the end, this is the beginning." Yet even in celebration, the scars of the past were visible: broken walls, charred buildings, and streets still littered with reminders of war. Foreign journalists described the atmosphere as bittersweet triumph. The peace deal had brought life back to the streets, but beneath every cheer lay an awareness that this calm could collapse at any moment. Israel's prime minister addressed the nation, emphasizing that the ceasefire was conditional. He said, "We have peace today, but our vigilance remains." His words echoed in the chamber, a reminder that diplomacy in this region was never a finish line, only an intermission. In the refugee camps of southern Gaza, joy took a quieter form. Families cooked together outside their tents, sharing rice, bread, and tea. One woman, her face lined with exhaustion, said softly to a reporter, "We don't know how long this will last, but tonight we sleep without fear." Nearby, a group of children gathered around a small radio, listening to music that had been banned during the fighting. Their laughter, high, unguarded, cut through the air like a prayer answered. But not everyone celebrated. In both nations, voices of skepticism grew louder. Some Israeli commentators warned that Hamas could use the truce to regroup militarily. In Gaza, activists accused Israel of delaying the next phase of prisoner releases. Social media became a battlefield of its own, filled with rumors, leaks, and manipulated videos claiming betrayal from both sides. The peace that had been so hard to build now trembled under the weight of misinformation. Yet, despite the doubts, something undeniable was happening. At hospitals in Gaza, doctors who had treated war victims for years were now preparing for civilian patients, births, fevers, minor wounds. Markets reopened, school gates unlocked for the first time since the bombings. A teacher swept dust from a blackboard and wrote 2 words in chalk:
welcome back. The crowd of children who peeked through the doorway smiled, uncertain but hopeful. Night returned, wrapping Gaza and Israel in a fragile stillness. Fireworks flared again above the Mediterranean, their reflections dancing on shattered windows and quiet rooftops. Families on both sides watched from balconies and courtyards, some in joy, some in disbelief, others simply watching because silence itself had become a miracle. The ceasefire had not erased pain, nor had it solved the conflict, but it had given people something they had not felt in years, a pause long enough to dream. And in that shared dream, somewhere between celebration and uncertainty, the human spirit dared once more to believe that peace, though fragile, might still find a home.
As the dust settles across Gaza and Israel, the world is left watching a fragile chapter of history unfold. The ceasefire stands, not as a symbol of final peace, but as proof that even the deepest wounds can momentarily close when dialogue takes the place of gunfire. Behind every headline, there are families rebuilding, doctors returning to their wards, and children learning what silence feels like when it's no longer born from fear. This story reminds us that truth often hides between the lines, not in speeches or statements, but in the quiet resilience of those who live through them. That concludes the series of facts we uncovered today. Don't forget to subscribe to the Bring the Fact channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any other important revelations.